I'm Vanessa, 25, raised in luxury and privilege my entire life. Then suddenly, my parents handed my $10 million inheritance to my sister Claire and physically dragged me out of our family estate by my hair. My grandfather Thomas, who raised me more than my actual parents, left everything to me for a reason. They thought they'd won, but I had a plan they never saw coming. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my family, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours. Growing up in our sprawling Connecticut estate, I always knew our family wasn't like others. My parents, Rebecca and William Montgomery, were fixtures in high society, but rarely fixtures in my life. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my older sister Claire, now 28, was the golden child. When she received a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday, I got a gift card. When she struggled in school, my parents hired the best tutors money could buy. When I brought home straight A's, I got a distracted good job without even a glance up from their phones. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Claire knew it too, which only made her behavior worse. She'd borrow my clothes and return them stained or torn. She'd invite my friends to parties and tell them I wasn't interested in coming. Once, she even stole my college application essay and submitted it as her own, forcing me to rewrite mine the night before the deadline. "Claire's just more sensitive than you," my mother would say whenever I complained. "You need to be more understanding of your sister's needs." My father was no better. "Stop trying to create drama, Vanessa." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Claire wouldn't do that intentionally. But while my parents were busy attending galas and building their social empire, my grandfather Thomas became my true parental figure. He lived in the east wing of our estate, semi-retired from the multinational corporation he'd built from nothing. Unlike my parents, he noticed me. "There's my brilliant girl," he'd say when I'd visit him after school, his eyes crinkling with genuine delight. "Tell me what fascinating things you learned today." Every weekend, Grandfather Thomas would take me sailing on his beloved yacht, the Eleanor, named after my grandmother who had passed before I was born. Out on the water, with the wind tousling my hair, he'd teach me about navigation, about reading the weather, about patience. "Life is like sailing, Vanessa," he'd tell me, his weather hands steady on the wheel. "Sometimes you have to tack against the wind to reach your destination. The direct path isn't always possible." On rainy weekends, we'd visit museums instead. While Claire complained about being bored, I soaked up everything like a sponge. Grandfather noticed and encouraged my curiosity. "Ask questions," he'd urge me. "Always ask questions. That's how you learn." As I got older, our conversations turned to business. He'd explain complex financial concepts, walking me through investment strategies and corporate governance. By the time I was in high school, I understood more about our family business than Claire ever bothered to learn, despite being 3 years older. "You have a mind for this," Grandfather would say proudly. "One day, you'll take what I've built and make it even greater." I didn't realize how prophetic those words would be, or how fiercely I'd have to fight to make them true. When Grandfather was diagnosed with terminal cancer, my world shattered. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 8, through sheer force of will. During those months, I practically lived in his wing of the house. I coordinated with his doctors, managed his medications, and spent hours just sitting with him, reading his favorite books aloud when his eyes grew too tired to read himself. Claire visited occasionally, usually when our parents pressured her, but she'd scroll through her phone the whole time and find an excuse to leave after 15 minutes. My parents were hardly better. They were always too busy, with some social obligation or business meeting. When they did visit, they spoke about Grandfather as if he wasn't in the room, discussing his condition with doctors while ignoring his actual wishes. In his final weeks, when he was lucid but growing weaker by the day, Grandfather had many private conversations with me. "Vanessa," he said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to listen carefully. Not everyone values integrity the way you do. Not everyone sees the true worth of things." I nodded, clutching his frail hand in mine. "I've watched how they treat you," he continued. "I've seen the inequality. I've made arrangements to ensure you're protected after I'm gone. Don't talk like that, I begged, tears forming in my eyes. We must talk like this, he insisted. I'm entrusting you with my legacy because you understand what truly matters. Promise me you'll stay strong, no matter what comes.
I promise, I whispered.
The night before he died, he made me lean in close, his breath faint against my ear. If things aren't as they should be, look for my message. I've prepared for every possibility. His eyes, still sharp despite his failing body, held mine intently. I will always protect you, even when I'm gone. I didn't understand what he meant then. By morning, he was gone. The funeral was a spectacle, more about my parents showing off their social connections than honoring the remarkable man my grandfather had been. Claire cried dramatically for the cameras, accepting condolences with practiced grace, though I'd never once seen her shed a tear in private. I sat quietly, my grief too deep for public consumption, remembering the man who had taught me how to navigate both sailing vessels and life itself. A week after the funeral came the reading of the will. Our family gathered in the mahogany-paneled library of our state, along with Gregory Phillips, the family lawyer who had always seemed more loyal to my parents than to my grandfather. When Gregory announced that grandfather had left me his controlling interest in Montgomery Enterprises, valued at approximately $10 million, plus the family estate, there was a moment of stunned silence. Claire received a smaller trust fund, enough to live comfortably, but not lavishly. My parents, who had expected to control the company until Claire was ready to take over, received only minor shares and some personal items. This can't be right, my mother hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather armrest of her chair. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. There must be some mistake. Claire burst into tears, not the performative ones from the funeral, but angry, bitter tears of entitlement denied. Gregory looked uncomfortable. The will is quite clear. Mr. Montgomery was explicit in his wishes. As the shock in the room settled into icy tension, I noticed my parents exchange glances with Gregory. My father gave an almost imperceptible nod, and Gregory cleared his throat. Of course, there's the matter of execution and transition. We'll need to discuss the details in the coming weeks. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of the betrayal that would leave me homeless, penniless, and fighting for what was rightfully mine. The week after the will reading, our home took on a strange atmosphere. Conversations would stop abruptly when I entered rooms. Doors that had always been open were suddenly closed. My parents, never particularly warm toward me, became downright cold. We're just processing our grief, my mother said dismissively when I asked if something was wrong. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she waved away my concern. Claire, meanwhile, underwent a bizarre transformation. Suddenly, she was the perfect daughter, bringing our parents coffee in the morning, asking about their days, offering to help with charity events my mother chaired. To me, she remained as cruel as ever, but now with an undercurrent of smug satisfaction. "Enjoying your temporary position?" she asked one evening, cornering me in the hallway outside my bedroom. "Don't get too comfortable with grandfather's things." When I tried to enter grandfather's study to begin understanding the business he'd left me, I found the room being systematically emptied of documents. "Just organizing," my father said smoothly when I questioned him. "Gregory needs certain papers for the probate process." Later that day, I overheard an argument behind my father's closed office door. "We need to fix Thomas's mistake before it's too late," my mother's voice, urgent and angry. "I'm handling it," my father replied. "Gregory says there are options." I confronted them at dinner that night, asking directly what they were planning. "Don't be paranoid, Vanessa," my father said, cutting his steak with precise movements. "This is exactly why your grandfather should have made more reasonable arrangements. You're clearly not ready for the responsibility." My mother nodded in agreement. "The stress is obviously affecting you. Perhaps you should see Dr. Mercer for some anxiety medication." I called my friend Ashley that night, explaining the strange behavior. Something feels really wrong, I told her. They're acting like they're planning something behind my back. Your family has always been kind of toxic, Ashley replied, concern evident in her voice. But this does sound weird. Can you check if anything important is missing? Taking her advice, I went to the safe in grandfather's study the next morning, only to find it already open and emptied of the financial documents I knew he kept there. Increasingly concerned, I contacted Patricia, my grandfather's longtime assistant who had retired shortly before his illness. We met at a coffee shop in town, away from my family's watchful eyes. Patricia seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. I can't say much, she said, stirring her untouched latte. But your grandfather was worried about exactly this situation. What situation? I pressed. Patricia lowered her voice. He knew they might try to contest the will. That's why he was so careful with the documentation. Contested on what grounds? She looked around again before answering. They might claim he wasn't of sound mind, or that you manipulated him. Before I could ask more questions, Patricia abruptly stood up. I shouldn't be talking to you. Just watch your back, Vanessa. Your parents have more influence than you realize. She left cash for her untouched coffee and hurried out, leaving me with more questions than answers. That afternoon, Gregory Phillips requested a meeting with me. In his downtown office, surrounded by law degrees and family photos, he suggested I be reasonable about expectations. Your grandfather's decisions have caused quite a stir, he said, his tone condescending. Perhaps we can find a compromise that satisfies everyone. There's nothing to compromise, I replied firmly. My grandfather's wishes were clear. Gregory smiled thinly. Wishes can be interpreted in many ways, especially when there are questions about a testator's mental capacity. I felt a chill run down my spine. My grandfather was perfectly sound of mind until the end. Of course you would say that, Gregory nodded sympathetically. But medical experts might have a different opinion. And juries tend to find it suspicious when elderly men change their wills to favor young relatives who spent unusual amounts of time with them near the end. The implication was clear and revolting. I left his office and immediately called a lawyer of my own, Benjamin Reynolds, a former classmate's father who specialized in estate litigation and had no connections to my family. Benjamin's findings were troubling. They've already filed preliminary paperwork suggesting your grandfather might not have been competent, he told me. And there are rumors of a revised will that supposedly supersedes the one that was read. That evening, my parents called a family meeting. Seated at our formal dining table, they suggested for the first time openly that the will might be contested. It would be in everyone's best interest to avoid a lengthy court battle, my father said, his tone reasonable but his eyes cold. Grandfather wanted me to have the company, I insisted. He prepared me for it my entire life. That's your interpretation, my mother replied. But the courts will consider all the facts, including your grandfather's deteriorating mental state during his illness. Claire sat silently throughout the conversation, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Over the next 2 weeks, my isolation within my own home grew complete. The security codes were changed without telling me. My belongings mysteriously migrated from common areas back to my bedroom. Household staff who had always been friendly became distant and formal. I discovered my home office had been searched when I found papers rearranged and my laptop in a slightly different position than I'd left it. When I mentioned this to my parents, they suggested I was becoming paranoid and might need professional help. Their gaslighting tactics were systematic and relentless. But I knew what was happening. They were building a case against me while simultaneously trying to undermine my mental stability and isolate me from potential allies. I began making copies of important documents and storing them with Benjamin. I recorded conversations when legally possible. And I started preparing for the worst, though even in my most pessimistic moments, I never imagined just how ugly things would become. 3 weeks after the will reading, on a rainy Tuesday morning, our family butler Peterson informed me that my presence was requested in the dining room for a family meeting. His usual warm manner was replaced with stiff formality, and he avoided meeting my eyes. As I entered the dining room, I immediately sensed this wasn't a normal family discussion. My parents sat at the head of the table, with Claire beside them. Gregory Phillips was there as well, along with another man I didn't recognize who was introduced as Dr. Harmon, a medical consultant. "Sit down, Vanessa," my father commanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Once I was seated, Gregory cleared his throat and began. "We've uncovered some concerning information regarding your grandfather's will." He slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside was what appeared to be a medical assessment, dated during my grandfather's final month, suggesting cognitive impairment consistent with both his illness and medication. Additionally, Gregory continued, producing another document, "We've discovered this." It was a letter, supposedly written by my grandfather, expressing concerns that I had been manipulating him during his illness and requesting a review of any changes to his will made during that period. "This is absurd," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "That's not even his handwriting. Anyone who knew him would see that immediately." "It's been verified by experts," Gregory replied smoothly. "What experts? Let me guess. People on your payroll?" I shot back. My mother interrupted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Vanessa, we understand this is difficult, but the facts are clear. Your grandfather wasn't himself at the end. We've already filed the necessary paperwork," my father added. "The courts have granted a temporary stay on the transfer of assets pending further investigation." That's when Claire finally spoke, her performance carefully reiterated. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I try to tell them we should just split everything evenly." The audacity of her lie made my blood boil. "You've been planning this from the moment the will was read," I accused. "All of you have." "That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that concerns us," Dr. Harmon interjected, though I hadn't even been introduced to him properly. "Your family is worried about your mental state." I pulled out my phone, where I'd saved photos of the original documents, medical assessments from my grandfather's actual doctors confirming his mental clarity, and notes from our conversations about the business. "Grandfather was perfectly sound of mind," I insisted, showing them the evidence. His doctors confirmed it multiple times. "He quizzed me on business strategy the day before he died. He was sharp until the end." My father's face darkened. "That's enough, Vanessa. The decision has been made." "What decision?" I demanded. "The courts have granted us temporary control of all assets," Gregory explained. "And given the volatile nature of the situation, your parents had decided it would be best if you moved out immediately." The shock hit me like a physical blow. "You're kicking me out? This is my house. Grandfather left it to me." "Not anymore," my mother said coldly. "The ownership is in dispute, and as the current legal residents with the longest tenure, we have the right to determine who stays here." "You have until this afternoon to pack your things," my father added. Claire couldn't contain her smirk any longer. "I can help you pack if you'd like." I stood up, so quickly my chair toppled backward. "You won't get away with this. Grandfather would be disgusted by what you're doing." "Grandfather isn't here," Claire replied. "And soon, neither will you be." I stormed upstairs to my room, my mind racing. I needed to salvage what I could, important documents, personal mementos, enough clothes to get by until I figured out my next move. I pulled my largest suitcase from the closet and began filling it with essentials. I was folding a sweater when my mother appeared in the doorway, watching me with narrowed eyes. "You're not taking anything valuable," she declared. "Nothing that could be considered part of the estate." "These are my personal belongings," I replied, continuing to pack. "Everything in this house belongs to the estate now," she insisted, stepping into the room. "Hand over that bag." I clutched the suitcase handle tighter.
No.
Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little snake. After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but belittle and ignore me my entire life. Grandfather was the only one who ever cared about me." "Because you manipulated him," she shrieked. "William. She's stealing estate property." My father appeared within seconds, as if he'd been waiting nearby for this exact moment. "Give me the bag, Vanessa," he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "No," I repeated, backing away. These are my things. You've already stolen millions from me. You don't get to take my clothes and personal items too. What happened next occurred so quickly, I barely had time to react. My father lunged forward, grabbing not the suitcase, but a fistful of my hair. Pain shot through my scalp as he yanked me toward the door. "William," my mother gasped, though whether in shock or encouragement, I couldn't tell. "You want to challenge us?" My father growled, dragging me by my hair toward the hallway. This is what happens to ungrateful, manipulative little girls. I screamed and struggled, but his grip was like iron. He dragged me down the hallway, my scalp on fire, past Claire, who stood watching with wide eyes, past stunned household staff who quickly averted their gaze rather than witness what was happening. Down the grand staircase we went, my body bumping painfully against each step, my father's grip never loosening. Through the marble foyer, to the massive front door, which my mother hurried ahead to open. With a final violent shove, my father pushed me out onto the wet driveway. My suitcase followed, thrown with such force that it burst open, spilling my belongings onto the rain-soaked pavement. "You are no longer welcome in this house," my father declared, straightening his tie as if he hadn't just physically assaulted his daughter. "Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing." Through tears of pain and rage, I gathered myself enough to deliver one final message. "You think you've won, but grandfather was smarter than all of you combined. When this is over, you'll regret the day you betrayed his wishes and me." The massive oak door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the pouring rain, my scalp throbbing, surrounded by my scattered possessions. Security guards appeared at the gate, making it clear they had instructions not to let me back in. I gathered what I could salvage of my belongings back into the damaged suitcase. With shaking hands, I called Ashley, the only friend I trusted completely. "I need help," I managed to say through tears. "They kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." As I waited for Ashley to arrive, huddled beneath a tree at the edge of the property, the full magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. In a single morning, I had lost my home, my inheritance, and any illusion that my family had ever cared about me. But through the pain and shock, I remembered my grandfather's words, "I've prepared for every possibility." And I realized that the fight had only just begun. Ashley arrived within 20 minutes, her compact car swerving to a stop just outside the estate gates. Her expression of shock when she saw me, hair disheveled, clothes soaked, face streaked with tears, and a visible bruise forming on my cheek where I'd hit the stairs, told me exactly how bad I looked. "Oh my God, Vanessa." She jumped out of the car and rushed to help me with my damaged suitcase. "What happened to you?" I couldn't answer immediately. The moment I was safely in her car, the adrenaline that had kept me functioning crashed, and I dissolved into uncontrollable sobs. Ashley drove me to her apartment, a modest one-bedroom in the city where she'd moved after college. She helped me into the shower, brought me dry clothes, and sat with me as I struggled to explain what had happened between bouts of tears. "We need to call the police," she insisted after I described my father dragging me by my hair. "That's assault. They can't just do that to you." The next morning, still shell-shocked, I agreed to file a police report. We went to the local precinct, where a bored-looking officer took my statement with visible skepticism. "So you're saying your father, William Montgomery, physically dragged you out of the house?" he clarified, typing slowly into his computer. "Yes," I said firmly. "By my hair, down a flight of stairs." The officer looked up. "The William Montgomery? Of Montgomery Enterprises?" I nodded. "And this was during a dispute over an inheritance?" "It wasn't a dispute. It was theft," I corrected. "They're trying to steal what my grandfather legally left to me." The officer's demeanor changed subtly. "I'll file the report, but I should warn you. This sounds like a civil matter. Family disputes over inheritance usually need to be handled in court, not through criminal charges." "The theft is a civil matter," I agreed. "Being physically assaulted is criminal." He nodded noncommittally. "I'll forward this to a detective, but don't get your hopes up. Without witnesses willing to testify." I left the station with a sinking feeling that nothing would come of the report. My suspicion was confirmed 3 days later when I received a call informing me that the district attorney had declined to pursue charges due to insufficient evidence and the civil nature of the underlying dispute. By then, I had already met with Benjamin Reynolds to understand my legal options regarding the inheritance. "They're moving quickly," Benjamin warned, reviewing the documents they'd filed. "The allegation that your grandfather was mentally incompetent is their strongest play, and they've already submitted statements from several doctors. But his actual physicians confirmed he was competent." I protested. "Yes, and we'll present that evidence. But they've found experts willing to review his medical records and testify that someone with his condition typically experiences cognitive decline." "What about the letter they produced?" "It's obviously a forgery." Benjamin nodded. "We'll demand handwriting analysis. But these cases can drag on for years, Vanessa. And they have resources to sustain a lengthy legal battle." "So do I insisted. "I have the inheritance." Benjamin's expression was grim. "That's the problem. Until this is resolved, you don't have access to those funds. And from what you've told me, they've already taken control of all liquid assets." Reality crashed down on me. I had less than $3,000 in my personal account, money I'd earned from a summer internship before graduate school. My credit cards were all on family accounts that had surely been canceled by now. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered, the magnitude of my situation becoming clear. "Do you have friends you can stay with? Other family members who might help?" I shook my head. "Just Ashley, and she can only keep me on her couch for so long." True to my fears, Ashley received a call from her landlord just 1 week after I moved in. Somehow, my parents had discovered where I was staying and had applied pressure. They threatened to buy the building and evict everyone if he doesn't enforce the no long-term guests policy, Ashley explained apologetically. "I tried to fight it, but I can't risk everyone in the building losing their homes." I understood. This wasn't her battle, and I couldn't drag her down with me. Over the next 3 weeks, I bounced between budget motels, spending my dwindling funds on basic necessities while applying for any job I could find. But each promising lead mysteriously evaporated after I'd interviewed. At one point, a sympathetic hiring manager pulled me aside. "I don't know what you did to piss off the Montgomerys," she whispered, "but I got a call from our biggest investor warning us not to hire you." I'm sorry. My parents' influence ran deeper than I'd imagined. They weren't just trying to take my inheritance. They were systematically destroying any chance I had of supporting myself. When my bank balance dropped below $300, I made the painful decision to sell my laptop, my last valuable possession. The pawn shop owner gave me $400, about a quarter of its worth. That money bought me 5 more nights in a motel and a few meager meals. On what was to be my last night with a roof over my head, I sat on the edge of the sagging motel bed, contemplating what would happen when I could no longer afford even this dismal shelter. The thought of sleeping in my car, the only asset I had left, a modest Honda Civic I'd purchased with my own internship money, filled me with dread and shame. In desperation, I emptied my damaged suitcase, searching for anything else I could sell. That's when I noticed my grandfather's antique pocket watch among my hastily packed belongings. I had grabbed it instinctively that day, knowing it was one of the few tangible connections to him I had left. Holding the heavy gold timepiece, I remembered how grandfather would check it during our sailing trips, teaching me to calculate our position based on the sun's angle. "A good watch is more than a timekeeper," he'd told me. "It's a tool for those who understand its secrets." Turning the watch over in my hands, I noticed something unusual about the back panel. It seemed to have a nearly invisible seam around the edge. Acting on instinct, I pressed the sides in a specific pattern, the same combination grandfather had taught me for his personal safe. To my astonishment, the back panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a tiny USB drive and a folded note in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note. "My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. I feared they might try to take what is rightfully yours. They have always been jealous of our bond and the potential I see in you. This drive contains everything you need: copies of my medical evaluations confirming my competence, recordings of our business discussions proving your readiness to lead, and documentation of several accounts known only to me. Most importantly, contact Richard Donovan at the address below. He has been my friend for 40 years and is expecting you. He will help you access what I've secured for just this contingency. Remember what I taught you about sailing against the wind. Sometimes the path to victory requires temporary retreat. All my love, Grandfather. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I immediately contacted Richard Donovan, who insisted on picking me up personally from the motel that very night. Thomas told me to expect you eventually, Richard explained as we drove to his home in the countryside. He suspected they might try something like this, though even he didn't anticipate the level of cruelty they've shown. Richard's spacious farmhouse became my sanctuary. From his guest room, I began to review the contents of the USB drive, and what I found left me breathless. Grandfather hadn't just suspected my family might betray me, he had meticulously documented their previous schemes and manipulations. There were recordings of my parents discussing how to control him during his illness, emails between Claire and my father strategizing ways to influence the will, and records of earlier attempts to misappropriate company funds. Most importantly, there were recordings of my grandfather explicitly stating his wishes to leave the business and estate to me, along with his reasons. My business acumen, ethical approach, and genuine interest in preserving his legacy contrasted with Claire's irresponsibility and my parents' focus on status over substance. The drive also contained access information for several offshore accounts containing approximately $2 million, funds my grandfather had set aside for emergencies, completely separate from the main inheritance and unknown to my parents or their lawyers. He called it his insurance policy, Richard explained, pouring me a glass of whiskey, my grandfather's favorite. Thomas knew exactly who he was dealing with. He just hoped it wouldn't come to this. The next day, Richard introduced me to Lawrence Schaefer, my grandfather's former business partner who had retired 5 years earlier. Thomas and I planned for this possibility, Lawrence confirmed, reviewing the documents I'd found. There are additional safeguards in place that your parents don't know about. With secure funding, a safe place to stay, and powerful allies, I finally had the resources to begin fighting back. Benjamin Reynolds joined us at Richard's home, bringing case files and legal strategies. With this evidence, we have a much stronger position, Benjamin said, reviewing the recordings. But we need to be strategic. Your parents won't hesitate to fight dirty. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed a comprehensive plan. I hired a private investigator to track Claire's activities, revealing her substantial gambling debts at several casinos, debts that had mysteriously disappeared right after my eviction. The investigator also uncovered that my parents' company was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had taken out massive loans using the anticipated inheritance as collateral. Without control of grandfather's assets, they would lose everything. That explains the desperation, Benjamin noted. This isn't just about greed, it's about survival. We also discovered that the medical expert who had questioned my grandfather's competence had never actually examined him and had been paid an exorbitant consulting fee by my parents. Most damning of all, we found evidence that Gregory Phillips had helped draft the forged letter supposedly from my grandfather, with metadata proving it was created 2 weeks after his death. Each discovery strengthened our case, but Benjamin cautioned patience. We need to build an airtight case before making our move. Once we file, they'll destroy any evidence they can. During this planning phase, I also found my grandfather's hidden journal in a secure box Richard had been keeping. The journal detailed years of manipulative behavior from my parents. Schemes to control company assets, attempts to isolate my grandfather from his friends, and their consistent pattern of favoring Claire while undermining me. One entry from just months before his diagnosis hit me particularly hard. Rebecca and William continue to underestimate Vanessa. Their blindness to her abilities may be their greatest weakness, and perhaps her greatest advantage. Claire plays their game, telling them what they want to hear, while Vanessa stands her ground. I've decided to protect her future, even if it means they will hate me for it. Some legacies are worth more than temporary peace. Reading his words, I felt a renewed connection to my grandfather and absolute certainty that I was fighting for what he truly wanted. By the end of the month, we had enough evidence to secure a temporary injunction freezing certain disputed assets. This first legal victory sent shockwaves through my family. Suddenly, my parents were calling continuously, leaving messages that alternated between threats and awkward attempts at reconciliation. Claire left a tearful voicemail claiming she was caught in the middle and never wanted things to go this far. I ignored them all, focusing instead on building our case while remaining completely hidden from public view. My parents had no idea where I was or who was helping me, an advantage I intended to maintain until the perfect moment to strike. Richard's guest house became my command center. With financial security for my grandfather's emergency funds, I assembled a team dedicated to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Benjamin Reynolds coordinated our legal strategy, while Lawrence Schaefer provided insider knowledge of the company's operations and vulnerabilities. Your grandfather built redundancies into everything, Lawrence explained, spreading company documents across the dining table. He had contingency plans for his contingency plans. One of those safeguards involved the corporate bylaws he had quietly modified before his illness. The changes required that any significant restructuring or asset transfer needed approval from a special ethics committee, a committee whose members included several of his most trusted colleagues, not just family. Your parents need to convince this committee to approve their actions, Lawrence noted. And these people were loyal to Thomas, not to Rebecca and William. Our first strategic move was contacting Martha Stevens, my grandfather's longtime secretary who had witnessed the original will signing. "I've been waiting for your call," Martha said when we met at a quiet cafe outside the city. "I knew something wasn't right when they announced the will was being contested. Your grandfather was sharp as a tack until the end." Martha provided a sworn affidavit detailing the will signing, including her observations of my grandfather's mental clarity and the explicit instructions he gave about his wishes. Next, we gathered statements from household staff who had overheard my parents plotting to contest the will even before my grandfather died. Several remembered specific conversations and were willing to testify, especially after hearing how I had been physically removed from the house. The private investigator I had hired, Marcus Daniels, delivered his comprehensive report on Claire's activities. "Your sister has a serious gambling problem," Marcus explained, showing me surveillance photos of Claire at high-stakes tables in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. She lost over $300,000 in the past year alone. More importantly, Marcus found records of a sudden payment clearing all of Claire's casino debts, a payment made the day after I was ejected from the house. "The money came from a company account that should have been frozen during probate," Marcus noted. "It's a clear violation of the estate freeze." Digging deeper into my parents' finances revealed the true motivation behind their desperate actions. Montgomery Ventures, my father's personal investment firm, had made a series of catastrophically bad decisions, leveraging the company to the hilt on high-risk ventures that had collapsed spectacularly. "They're underwater by at least $15 million, Lawrence concluded after reviewing the financial documents Marcus had obtained. "Without your inheritance, they'll lose everything. The company, the estate, their social standing. Everything." This explained their willingness to go to such extreme lengths, including forging documents and physically assaulting me. They weren't just being greedy or playing favorites with Claire, they were fighting for survival. I also discovered my grandfather had kept a detailed journal documenting his concerns about my parents' business practices and their treatment of me. The journal contained entries going back years, describing specific incidents where they had undermined me or favored Claire unfairly. One particularly damning entry read, "William approached me today about changing my will to favor Claire. When I refused, suggesting Vanessa's business acumen makes her the better choice to lead the company, he became enraged. I fear what they might do when I'm gone. I must protect Vanessa's inheritance at all costs." Armed with this mountain of evidence, Benjamin filed a comprehensive lawsuit against my parents, Claire, and Gregory Phillips, alleging fraud, forgery, conversion of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. The filing sent shockwaves through the business community. Montgomery Enterprises stock dropped 15% in a single day as investors reacted to the allegations of financial misconduct and forgery. My parents attempted damage control, issuing press statements portraying me as unstable and ungrateful. Claire gave a tearful interview claiming she was heartbroken by the family conflict and only wanted what was fair for everyone. Their PR campaign gained some traction until our anonymous tip to several business publications about the unauthorized casino debt payments. Financial journalists began investigating more deeply, uncovering additional irregularities in the company's books. Meanwhile, Claire began sending increasingly desperate text messages. "Vanessa, please, we need to talk. This has all gone too far. I never wanted them to hurt you. You don't understand what's happening. Mom and Dad are falling apart. Can we please meet somewhere private? I know you hate me right now, but I'm scared of what Dad might do. He's not himself anymore." I ignored these messages, recognizing them as attempts to locate me or manipulate me emotionally. Benjamin advised maintaining complete radio silence with all family members until the court proceedings began. The pressure on my parents intensified when several members of the ethics committee resigned in protest after learning about the forged documents. Their public statements expressing concern about potentially fraudulent activity further damaged my parents' credibility. By the time our case reached the initial hearing, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Business publications ran articles questioning the management of Montgomery Enterprises. Social circles that had once embraced my parents now whispered about their fall from grace. Throughout this period, I remained completely hidden, staying at Richard's guest house and avoiding public appearances. My parents had no idea where I was or who was helping me, a strategic advantage that clearly frustrated them, as evidenced by the private investigators we spotted surveilling Benjamin's office and Richard's known residences. As the date for the main hearing approached, we prepared our most powerful evidence, video testimony my grandfather had recorded before his death, explicitly stating his wishes and his concerns about potential interference from my parents. I, Thomas Montgomery, being of sound mind, make this recording on June 12th to confirm my decision to leave controlling interest in Montgomery Enterprises and the family estate to my granddaughter, Vanessa Montgomery. This decision is made with full awareness and after careful consideration of each family member's capabilities and character. The video continued for 20 minutes, with my grandfather methodically outlining his reasons and addressing potential challenges to his decision. He even submitted to a brief mental competency evaluation on camera, conducted by his primary physician, demonstrating his sharp mind and clear reasoning. This recording, unknown to my parents, would be our trump card, irrefutable evidence of my grandfather's wishes and mental capacity, impossible to dismiss as manipulation or forgery. The night before the hearing, I received an unexpected email from Peterson, our family butler who had worked in our home for over 20 years. "Miss Vanessa, I can no longer remain silent about what happened. Your father's treatment of you was unforgivable, and I am ashamed that I did nothing to stop it. I have submitted my resignation and am willing to testify about what I witnessed that day and the conversations I overheard in the weeks prior. Please let me know if my testimony would be helpful to your case." Peterson's message brought tears to my eyes, the first indication that someone from my old life was willing to stand up for what was right, even at personal cost. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself holding my grandfather's pocket watch, running my thumb over its smooth gold surface. "I hope I'm making you proud," I whispered. "Tomorrow we fight back." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when we arrived. For months, I had stayed completely out of public view, leaving my parents and sister to control the narrative.
Today, that would change.
I stepped out of Richard's car wearing a tailored navy suit that had belonged to my grandmother, another treasure Richard had safeguarded for me. My hair was styled professionally, hiding the small scar on my scalp where my father's violent grip had left a lasting mark. Flashbulbs exploded as reporters recognized me. Benjamin walked beside me, projecting calm confidence as journalists shouted questions. "Miss Montgomery, where have you been hiding? Vanessa, how do you respond to your family's claims about your mental state?" Is it true you manipulated your grandfather during his illness? I ignored them all, walking steadily forward with my eyes on the courthouse doors. The moment for statements would come later. Inside the courtroom, I saw my parents and Claire for the first time since my ejection from our home. My mother gasped audibly when she saw me, whispering urgently to my father. Claire stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Gregory Phillips leaned over to confer with their litigation team, 5 high-priced attorneys from one of the city's most prestigious firms. Our side seemed modest in comparison, just Benjamin, Lawrence, and 2 associates. Judge Eleanor Harrington, known for her no-nonsense approach and impeccable ethics, called the court to order. Before we begin, she announced, I want to make it clear that I've reviewed the preliminary evidence from both sides, and I find some of the allegations extremely troubling. This court will not tolerate fraudulent documents, intimidation of witnesses, or misappropriation of disputed assets while this matter is being resolved. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge's stern gaze lingered on him. The proceedings began with my parents' attorneys presenting their case. My grandfather had been mentally compromised during his final months. I had taken advantage of his weakened state to influence his decisions. The will that left me the company and estate didn't reflect his true wishes. They presented statements from doctors who had never actually treated my grandfather but offered opinions about how his condition typically affected cognitive function. They submitted the forged letter questioning his own decisions. And they painted me as a manipulative granddaughter who had isolated a vulnerable old man from his family. When it was our turn, Benjamin started methodically dismantling their case. First, he called my grandfather's actual physicians, who testified under oath that Thomas Montgomery had remained mentally sharp until his final days, regularly discussing complex business matters and making clear, consistent decisions about his estate. Next came Martha Stevens, the secretary who had witnessed the will signing, who described my grandfather's explicit instructions and his sound mental state. Several household staff members testified about overhearing my parents plotting to contest the will even before my grandfather died, directly contradicting their claim that they were shocked by its contents. The financial experts we'd engaged presented evidence of document forgery, showing conclusively that the letter supposedly written by my grandfather had been created 2 weeks after his death, using a computer registered to Gregory Phillips's law firm. But our most powerful moment came when Benjamin introduced the video testimony my grandfather had recorded. The courtroom fell silent as my grandfather's image appeared on the screen. Even in his weakened physical state, his mental acuity was unmistakable. He systematically addressed and refuted every challenge he anticipated my parents might make, demonstrating both his competence and his foresight. When he spoke directly about his decision to leave the company to me, his reasoning was clear. Vanessa has demonstrated the business acumen, ethical judgment, and genuine care for this company's legacy that I've always hoped to see in my successors. While I love all my family, I must make this decision based on who will best preserve what I've built and lead it honorably into the future. The video concluded with a statement that brought tears to my eyes. If this recording is being viewed, it means my decisions have been challenged. To those attempting to override my clearly stated wishes, know that I anticipated your actions and have taken steps to ensure my true intentions prevail. And to Vanessa, remember that true strength often comes from adversity. I believe in you. When the video ended, I noticed my mother dabbing at her eyes, though whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance, I couldn't tell. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Claire looked physically ill. The final blow to their case came from an unexpected quarter. Peterson, our longtime butler, testified about the day I was ejected from the house, describing in painful detail how my father had dragged me by my hair down the stairs while my mother and sister watched without intervention. In my 23 years of service to the Montgomery family, Peterson concluded, I have never witnessed such cruelty. Miss Vanessa did nothing to deserve such treatment, regardless of any disputes over the estate. By the time closing arguments concluded, the shift in the courtroom's atmosphere was palpable. Judge Harrington's expression had grown increasingly severe as our evidence mounted, particularly regarding the forged documents and misappropriated funds. After a brief recess, she returned with her ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds that Thomas Montgomery was of sound mind when executing his will, and that the document presented by the defendants purporting to question that will is fraudulent. The original will shall be upheld in its entirety. She continued, her voice sharp with disapproval. Furthermore, the court finds that William and Rebecca Montgomery, along with their attorney Gregory Phillips, engaged in fraudulent activities in their attempt to circumvent the legitimate will. All assets transferred during the dispute period must be returned to the estate immediately for proper distribution according to the original will's terms. She added a final, devastating statement. Given the evidence of document forgery and misappropriation of estate assets, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. Mr. Phillips, I am also referring you to the State Bar Association for ethics violations. Outside the courtroom, my parents attempted to approach me, my father's expression a strange mixture of anger and desperation. Vanessa, we need to talk, he began, reaching for my arm. Benjamin stepped between us. My client has nothing to say to you outside of formal legal communications. Any attempt to contact her directly will be considered harassment. As security escorted them away, I heard my mother say, "We need to offer her a compromise. We can't lose everything." 3 days after the ruling, as the reality of their defeat sank in, I received a call from my parents' new attorney, Gregory Phillips, having been suspended pending investigation. "Your parents would like to discuss a settlement," the attorney began. "The judge's ruling was quite clear," I replied. "There's nothing to settle. They're prepared to drop all appeals and publicly acknowledge the validity of your grandfather's will," he persisted. "In exchange, they ask for a small portion of the estate to maintain their current residence and lifestyle." I considered the offer briefly, then responded, "I'll meet with them, but I make no promises." The meeting was scheduled at Benjamin's office, neutral ground. My parents arrived looking haggard, the strain of recent weeks evident in their appearances. Claire came separately, sitting slightly apart from them. My father spoke first, his usual commanding tone replaced with something almost pleading. "Vanessa, we made a terrible mistake. We were desperate, the business was failing, we were about to lose everything. We didn't mean for things to go so far. You dragged me out of my home by my hair," I replied calmly. "You threw me onto the street with almost nothing. You tried to destroy my reputation and my future. Those aren't mistakes. They're choices." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We were wrong. Horribly wrong. But we're still your parents. Surely that counts for something." "It counted for nothing when you chose Claire over me my entire life," I said. "It counted for nothing when you forged documents to steal my inheritance. Why should it suddenly count now?" Claire finally spoke, her voice small. "They made me do it, Vanessa. They said if I didn't go along with their plan, they'd cut me off too. I was scared." "You're 28 years old, Claire," I replied. "You could have chosen differently. You watched them assault me and did nothing." My father leaned forward. "What do you want, Vanessa? Name your price. There must be some arrangement we can reach." I looked at each of them in turn, the family who had betrayed me so completely, and felt a strange sense of calm. "I want you out of the estate by the end of the month," I said simply. "You can take your personal belongings, but nothing that belonged to grandfather. Claire's trust fund will remain as he intended, but you two will receive nothing beyond what was specifically listed in the will." "That's it?" my father asked incredulously. "We'll be ruined." "You ruined yourselves," I corrected him. "Consider yourselves fortunate that I'm not pressing criminal charges for assault and fraud." 2 weeks later, I stood in the foyer of the estate, my estate now, watching as my parents supervised the loading of their personal items into moving vans. They had found a small house in a neighboring town, downsizing dramatically from the luxury they had always known. As they prepared to leave, my father approached me one last time. "You've won, Vanessa. I hope it brings you the satisfaction you're looking for." I met his gaze steadily. This was never about winning, Dad. It was about honoring grandfather's wishes and standing up for myself. Something I should have done years ago. He nodded stiffly and walked away without another word. My mother followed, not even glancing in my direction. After they left, I walked slowly through the grand house that had never truly felt like home until this moment. In my grandfather's study, now restored with his books and mementos, I placed his pocket watch on the desk and whispered, "We did it, grandfather. Just like you planned." The victory was complete, but as I stood alone in the massive house, I realized it felt emptier than I had expected. Not because I missed my parents or their toxic presence, but because winning a battle wasn't the same as healing from the war. In the weeks following my family's departure, I found myself wandering the halls of the estate, feeling strangely hollow despite my victory. The rooms echoed with memories, most painful, some precious, but all belonging to a life that no longer existed. I had reclaimed my inheritance and vindicated my grandfather's wishes, but the cost had been steep, the complete severing of my family ties and the public exposure of our most private conflicts. On the recommendation of Richard, who had become something of a surrogate father figure, I began seeing Dr. Eleanor West, a therapist specializing in family trauma and betrayal. "What you're experiencing is entirely normal," Drive West assured me during our first session. "You've been through extreme betrayal by the people who should have protected you most. The legal victory doesn't automatically heal those emotional wounds." Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I navigated my new reality. We worked through the accumulated pain of years of favoritism and neglect, the acute trauma of my violent ejection from the house, and the complex emotions surrounding my complete estrangement from my family. I should feel happier about winning, I confessed during one session. I have everything grandfather wanted me to have. But sometimes I just feel empty. "Justice isn't the same as healing," Drive West replied gently. "One is external, the other internal. You've achieved justice, but healing takes time." 3 months after the court ruling, I received an unexpected letter, not from my parents, but from Claire. Unlike their manipulative attempts at reconciliation, her message seemed genuinely remorseful. "Vanessa, I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't insult you by asking for it. But I need you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you, not just during the inheritance fight, but throughout our lives. I've started therapy to address my gambling addiction and the deeper issues that made me so jealous of you for so long. My therapist suggested I make amends where possible, though she acknowledged some damage can't be undone. If you're ever willing to meet, even just once, I would appreciate the chance to apologize in person. If not, I understand completely. Regardless of your decision, I want you to know that grandfather was right to choose you. You deserved better than how our family treated you. Claire." After careful consideration and discussion with Drive West, I agreed to meet Claire at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in a neighborhood far from our usual haunts. She arrived looking different than I remembered. Simpler clothes, less makeup, missing the artificial confidence she had always projected. When she spotted me, her steps faltered, as if she might lose her nerve. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I honestly didn't expect you to agree." "I almost didn't," I admitted. Claire nodded, accepting this without argument. "I don't know where to start, except to say I'm sorry. Not just for the inheritance situation, but for everything. For taking your things growing up. For making sure you were always second. For watching Dad drag you down those stairs and doing nothing." Her voice broke on the last words, tears welling in her eyes. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Was it really just about money? Claire stared into her untouched coffee. "At first, yes. When the will was read, I was shocked and furious. All my life, Mom and Dad told me I was the heir apparent. Finding out grandfather chose you instead felt like having the ground disappear beneath me." She continued, her voice steadier now. "But when they started forging documents and plotting to declare him incompetent, I knew it was wrong. I told myself it was just correcting an injustice, that you had somehow manipulated him. It was easier than admitting I wasn't the person he wanted to lead his company. Why didn't you stop them? I pressed. You could have spoken up. Because I'm a coward, she replied simply. And because I needed the money desperately. The gambling debts, they were worse than you know. There were threats involved. Dangerous people. When Mom and Dad offered to clear everything in exchange for my support, I convinced myself I had no choice. Her honesty, however painful, felt like the first authentic conversation we'd ever had. We talked for nearly 3 hours, unraveling decades of rivalry and resentment. Claire didn't ask for money or position or even relationship, just understanding and possibly, someday, forgiveness. As we prepared to leave, she handed me a small package. Grandfather's cufflinks, she explained. Dad took them the day they cleared out. I bought them back from the pawn shop where he sold them. It was a small gesture, but it touched me deeply. While I wasn't ready to welcome Claire back into my life completely, I left our meeting with a sense that healing, for both of us, might eventually be possible. With the legal battles behind me and the company now securely under my control, I began focusing on honoring my grandfather's legacy in meaningful ways. Using a portion of the inheritance, I established the Thomas Montgomery Foundation for Ethics in Business, dedicated to promoting integrity and ethical leadership in corporate governance. The Foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for business students from disadvantaged backgrounds, creating opportunities for brilliant minds who, like my grandfather in his youth, might otherwise be overlooked. The sprawling family estate, despite being legally mine, never felt like a place where I could build a new life. Too many painful memories lingered in its elegant rooms. After careful consideration, I decided to sell it, donating a significant portion of the proceeds to organizations supporting victims of family violence and financial abuse. I purchased a more modest home in Boston, closer to the company headquarters, but far enough from my old life to represent a fresh start. The move coincided with a significant restructuring of Montgomery Enterprises, refocusing the company on the ethical business practices my grandfather had valued. During this period of transition, I met Jordan Taylor, a brilliant environmental engineer who was developing sustainable technologies our company was interested in acquiring. Unlike previous relationships where my family name and wealth had often been the primary attraction, Jordan was refreshingly unimpressed by my status. "I'm more interested in what you're doing with the company than the fact that you own it," he said during our first dinner together. Anyone can inherit wealth. Using it to make a positive difference, that's the impressive part. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than superficial attraction. Jordan became my partner in every sense, supporting my healing journey while challenging me to look forward rather than backward. A year after the court ruling, I had an unexpected encounter with my parents at a charity gala in New York. I had known they might be there but decided to attend anyway, refusing to let their presence dictate my choices. The moment was painfully awkward. My mother froze in mid-conversation when she spotted me across the room, my father's face flushing with some combination of anger and embarrassment. After a moment's hesitation, they approached, plastering on social smiles. "Vanessa, you look well," my mother said, her voice overly bright. "We've been hoping to speak with you. The company is performing admirably under your leadership," my father added. "Perhaps it's time we discussed rebuilding some family bridges." I regarded them calmly, noting the designer clothes that suggested they were maintaining appearances despite their reduced circumstances. The old Vanessa might have been intimidated by their practiced social confidence or swayed by familial obligation. The woman I had become recognized the approach for what it was, another attempt at manipulation. "I'm afraid I have nothing to discuss with you," I replied, keeping my voice level. "My family now consists of people who value and respect me. I wish you both well, but that chapter of my life is closed." As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting, the final release of any obligation I had felt toward the people who had betrayed me so completely. Later that month, on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave alone. The simple granite headstone reflected his preference for substance over show, engraved with just his name, dates, and the phrase, "integrity above all." I placed a small arrangement of sailing flags beside the flowers, our private signal for mission accomplished during our adventures on the water. I wish you could see what we've built, I told him, running my fingers over the cool stone. The foundation is helping so many people. The company is stronger than ever. And I'm finally becoming the person you always saw in me. As I stood there, I reflected on everything the past year had taught me. That family is defined by love and loyalty, not blood. That strength often emerges from our deepest wounds. That justice, while necessary, is only the beginning of healing. And that our choices, not our circumstances, ultimately define us. I had entered this battle as a victim fighting for what was rightfully mine. I emerged as something more. A leader, a builder, and finally the captain of my own life. Back home that evening, sitting in my new study with Jordan reading quietly beside me, I held my grandfather's pocket watch and smiled at how far I'd come. From being physically dragged from my home with nothing but a damaged suitcase to rebuilding a life and legacy that honored not just my grandfather's wishes but my own potential, it had been an extraordinary journey. The inheritance was never just about the money. It was about recognizing my worth when no one else would. It was about standing up for myself when it would have been easier to surrender. Most importantly, it was about becoming the kind of person who could face betrayal without becoming bitter, who could achieve justice without seeking vengeance, and who could build something meaningful from the ashes of broken relationships. That's the real inheritance my grandfather left me. Not the millions or the company or the property, but the unshakable belief that I was worthy of it all. If you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours or stand your ground when everyone else expected you to give in, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost? Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to fight their own battles. Remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from our most difficult moments. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the courage to claim what's rightfully yours.